The storytelling human mind. The human mind has a tendency to create stories. Stories that it entertain itself with. Stories that it sometimes terrifies itself with. Stories that sometimes makes it happy. Stories that sometimes makes it sad. Stories that creates all kinds of emotions. The human mind is a storytelling machine. It is a marvelous tool. There is so much potential creativity, creation. But there is what to call it? There is a potential danger stored within those stories. And that is that the mind is certain that the stories that the mind is telling itself are true. The mind is simply convinced that all the stories that it is telling itself is the truth. And that is the reason for all unnecessary suffering in the world, on what we could call a personal level and on a collective level. All unnecessary suffering. And if we are to estimate the total amount of suffering that the human being is inflicting upon itself and upon nature in general, upon life, if we are to guess how much of that suffering is unnecessary, well, when you awaken, you come to realize that it is a very huge part of that suffering. A vast majority of that suffering that is unnecessary, that simply does not have to happen, but happens only because the human mind is certain that the stories that it tells itself is the truth. And I know that most human minds, when they are being confronted with a message like this, first of all, the mind does not want to know this. So that is why a message like this never will become popular, because the mind does certainly not want to know. that that the stories that it is telling itself are not the truth. And it will argue. And granted, there are what we could call some relative truths. Not really truths, but relative truths. That means that some of the stories, they are relative true, seen through the lens of that story, seen through the lens of those convictions, so those belief systems. Relative to those belief systems, some of the stories seems arguably true, but there aren't. No story can contain truth. And then the mind will say, well, do we then have to stop telling stories? No, absolutely not. Tell all the beautiful stories that you can, but never, never forget that they are stories. The human being is killing other human beings. The human being is sometimes killing itself because it believes in a particular story. It is tragic. And the only way out of this madness is to wake up. Wake up to truth. By realizing that all stories, they are only stories. And yes, we can have fun challenging each other's with our stories. There is no problem in that, as long as we know that that is what we are doing. No need to create any kind of unnecessary suffering. We can have fun doing it. We can meet each other, and then we can evolve. We can grow out of the madness. Taking the next step in the evolutionary path of the human being. No, the human being is certainly not as smart as it tells itself it is. That's just another story. In an evolutionary perspective, the human being is only an infant. There is so much to discover, but you will have to wake up first, because you cannot discover it through your stories. That's a bubble, a belief system bubble that you are stuck within. Simply bring awareness to the mind's storytelling patterns, the habitual storytelling patterns. Just watch it. Watch it how it is a narrator, how it comments on everything, how it believes that it knows the truth. Just simply watch it. Keep on watching it. Don't do anything. And then the mind says, for how long time do I have to watch myself? The mind does not like to be watched. So this will only happen if you intuit that there is something behind the stories. And of course there are. There are something marvelous behind the stories. But you have to move through the stories, transcend the stories. You need to be very curious and very honest. Because the storytelling mind will constantly try to convince you that this leads nowhere. It wants you to keep being stuck within it, creating suffering for yourself and maybe for others. Suffering and pain. It's time for the human being to move on, to go beyond. And we will most certainly not stop telling stories, but our relationship to the stories that the mind tells itself, that will change. And you will discover something very marvelous, magical. About yourself, about existence, about the universe, about the meaning of life. All of those answers, they lie beyond the stories that the mind is telling itself. No, the answers, they will not come to you in the traditional way. They will not come to you as new beliefs. When you wake up, you will be seeing clearly. You will no longer be perceiving yourself or the world through the stories of the mind. It is time, and you know it. Watch the habitual patterns of the mind. Learn about it. Don't do anything, just simply observe. You could call it meditation, but you could also call it nothing. But be curious about what it is that is going on inside of the mind. Don't try to fix it. Just simply observe. It is time. And you know it. Thank you for listening, my friend. I will be back.